Let's jump right in. In 1956, a 21-year-old former truck driver became an unprecedented cultural force that literally rewired American society. In this explainer, we aren't just looking at a musician, we're stepping into a living, breathing historical rupture. It was this intense moment where technology, youth culture, race, economics, and sheer moral panic violently collided. The establishment genuinely believed they could crush him, and you know what? The outcome of this collision was anything but inevitable.
To really get this era, we've got to completely strip away the sanitized, mythological image of the king of rock and roll. Back then, Elvis Presley was treated as a dangerous, disruptive threat to American morality. The real terror for the establishment wasn't just that he was sexual. It was that he was expressing this physical vulnerability and fluidity that had previously been restricted to female burlesque performers. He was actively subverting entrenched gender norms. As this quote from Jack Gould shows, this wasn't just a bad review. This was raw, institutional fear reacting to a massive psychological threat.
Section 1. The Television Rupture. The gates to the heavily guarded American living room were about to be breached.
Look at how incredibly fast this happened. In just 9 short months, he transformed from a regional curiosity, causing a few raised eyebrows on stage show, to a nationwide scandal by June, and then by September, he commanded the largest broadcast audience in human history. The sheer sociological velocity of his ascent is just staggering. The whole thing really pivoted on one visceral sensory moment. He dispensed with his acoustic guitar, which up until then had acted like a physical barrier between his hips and the audience. He steps forward, right? And he performs this halftime tempo shift on Hound Dog. It was uninhibited. It was intensely physical. That exact second, the moment he abandoned that guitar, acted as the inciting incident for an absolute generational civil war.
So the media establishment basically suffers a collective psychological break. Critics completely lacked the vocabulary for this kind of uninhibited physical display, so they just weaponized their outrage. Magazines were publishing these astonishingly explicit tirades, analyzing his knee motions and his shoulder shaking as if they were dissecting some profound moral decay. The gatekeepers were losing their grip, and honestly, they knew it.
Moving on to Section 2. The Genesis of Fandom. The hysteria is about to leap from the TV screen directly onto the streets.
Within just a 6-month gap, you see this terrifying escalation. It's almost a social breakdown. In April, down in Houston, the environment was civilized. Elvis could literally sit on the edge of the stage and sign autographs. But flash forward to October, in that exact same city, the crowd had doubled into total claustrophobic pandemonium. 50 police officers had to man the aisles, and fans rushed the stage so hard that he was whisked away in a waiting police car.
Put yourself in the shoes of his management for a second. They're suddenly realizing that standard operating procedures were now potentially lethal. In San Antonio, an autograph table, which was a completely normal practice at the time, was stormed by 3,000 chanting teenagers. The audience had shifted from being passive observers to aggressive physical participants in the spectacle. Casual fan interaction absolutely obliterated, instantly.
13,125. That's how many fans packed the Toledo Sports Arena. The sheer decibel level of that crowd fundamentally and permanently altered the very definition of a concert. By that November show, the continuous screaming was so deafening that the music itself became basically irrelevant. His acoustic guitar was now nothing more than a visual prop in what felt like a mass religious experience.
Section 3. Class, Race, and Rebellion. Now the music becomes a lightning rod for some deep socio-political anxieties.
We have to understand that this hostility was deeply woven into the racial tensions of a rapidly transforming America. By fusing white country and Western with black rhythm and blues, Elvis was crossing invisible but heavily guarded cultural lines. Just think about this. On the exact same day he was provoking outrage with his dancing up in Omaha, segregationists in Alabama were picketing rock and roll shows, calling it jungle music. He unwittingly triggered the deepest socio-political fault lines of Jim Crow America.
And he knew exactly what was happening. This quote shows his raw awareness of his economic ascent from extreme poverty, which in itself became a massive target for criticism. He wasn't old money, and his spending was this deliberate rejection of traditional modesty. Here's a working-class kid from Tupelo who is newly wealthy, holding the most powerful cultural megaphone in the world, and he absolutely refused to apologize for it.
The establishment was terrified. A rural truck driver now wielded more cultural influence than the coastal media elite. So the backlash was fiercely classist, heavily focused on gatekeeping power. Journalists framed his Cadillacs as vulgar, sneering at him as a youth who fancies himself as terribly shart.
It was a clear insinuation that he was punching way above his weight class and just didn't belong in polite society. Which brings us to Section 4, the economics of hysteria, trying to contain the sheer volume of it all.
Standard local policing entirely collapsed under the weight of this hysteria. The live music industry was forced into sudden militarization just to manage a concert. Look at these security numbers. From deploying the Navy Shore Patrol in Memphis to bringing in 100 National Guardsmen in Mississippi, the massive scale of his audience birthed the multi-million-dollar stadium touring logistics that we still see today.
It's a remarkable, almost cinematic contrast that makes him feel so deeply human. Just 11 years prior, he was a poor, barefoot 10-year-old kid singing at a dairy show on this exact stage. Now, he's returning home as a conquering modern demigod. His mere presence required 100 National Guardsmen surrounding the stage just to keep him safe. Historians actually compared this homecoming to a visit from a sitting president.
But Elvis wasn't just loved. He was deeply hated, especially by displaced patriarchal figures who felt their control slipping away. In Toledo, a jealous husband actually confronted him in a hotel bar because his wife was carrying a photo of the singer. It led to a massive brawl where the attacker tried to throw guitarist Scotty Moore over a railing. The hysteria of the fans was matched blow for blow by the aggressive resentment of his detractors. The cultural stakes here were literal, and they were very physical.
All right, Section 5, the Ed Sullivan Compromise. How do you package a hurricane? $50,000. At the time, that was an astronomical, completely unheard of fee for a television guest spot. Ed Sullivan was forced to pay it for 3 appearances, completely backtracking on his earlier vow to never book Presley. Why? Because Steve Allen had just crushed Sullivan's ratings by hosting Elvis in July. This was the exact moment capitalism defeated moral panic. Principles completely evaporated the second economic incentives and network ratings were on the line.
60 million people, over 82% of the American television audience tuned in for that September show. Let that sink in. Against that kind of mass demand, censorship complaints were instantly rendered irrelevant. The rival network didn't even bother putting on a competing show. They just aired a movie. The entire world basically stopped to watch.
And after that performance, Sullivan publicly patted Elvis on the back and declared him thoroughly all right. That simple endorsement acted as a grand cultural ceasefire, a resolution to all the tension that had been building the entire year. Sullivan was the ultimate arbiter of middle-class taste. So, by putting his arm around this controversial kid, he essentially gave parents across the nation permission to stand down and just accept the new reality of rock and roll.
And here is the massive narrative payoff. We always hear that Elvis was censored from the very start, right? But viewers actually saw everything during his first Sullivan appearances. That famous waist-up censorship, that only happened on his third show in January 1957. Historians now suggest it was a manufactured controversy. The establishment thought they were censoring him, but in reality, his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, was brilliantly weaponizing their prudishness. He turned their moral panic into a marketing strategy that practically printed money. As we wrap up this explainer, it's clear that the billion-dollar pop culture machine of today is simply running the operating system coded in 1956. The massive stadium tours, the militarized security, the manufactured controversies, it all traces back to this single 12-month span. But it leaves us with a lingering question. If a single artist could so violently disrupt the moral and social order of a nation back then, who holds the power to do it today? And honestly, would we even allow it to happen?